Hello everyone, my name is Kate McCarthy and I'm joined here today by Jim Nolan and Jimmy Murphy for an event as part of the Waterford Writers' Weekend, which is part of the Imagine Arts Festival that is running here in Waterford in October. So Jim and Jimmy, you're both very welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure.
Just before we were talking about the 20 years to the day of a production that you both share together. So could we talk a little bit about that? And that is the Kings of the Kilburn High Road. Is that the production that you first... So you worked together in that production. Was that your first time meeting each other, or how did that collaboration begin?
I think I'd sent Brothers of the Brush to Red Kettle, and I'm sure of it I did because I was aware of them. But I remember it was the end of the 90s, and we were at an opening night in the Peacock. And Jim had come down for the show, and I think it was a Donald Kelly play, and he introduced himself and said, "Look, I'm leaving Red Kettle, would you like a commission before I go?" And I actually had a play on in rehearsals in the Abbey, and I said, you know, I already have a play, and I don't think the Abbey are going to do a play straight away after this, so would you like to have a read of it? And he said, sure, send it on. So I think first thing the next day, I sent it off down to Red Kettle, and the rest became history.
Yeah, I can't honestly say that I remember having Brothers of the Brush on my desk before I left Red Kettle, but I do remember seeing it at the Peacock. Was the Peacock?
Yeah.
Yeah, and being enormously impressed. I hadn't met Jimmy, so it was just the play I was dealing with, and I really liked it. I can't remember then whether the play came to us after that or before or whenever. But I know I was really happy to have met Jimmy that night, and particularly thrilled that we didn't have to lay out the money to commission the play that had already existed. And it was just one of those lucky days. It was one of the great thrills of running Red Kettle was the new play part of it. As a writer myself, it was a real buzz to be commissioning new work and to be presenting new work for the first time. But when I read this thing, the Kings of the Kilburn High Road, I knew I had something very special. I was unfortunately leaving Red Kettle that year, but commissioned the play or put the contract for the play in place rather before I left, and also the stipulation with the incoming artistic director that I would get to direct it. So I was going to leave my mark either way on that play. I wasn't going to let anybody else have it, and it was also, I thought, a great gift to give to Ben Hennessy in his first year as artistic director, and Ben very much saw it that way and was happy for us to take it from there. So it was a great old start to what turned out to have been a wonderful journey.
Yeah, and what was it? What do you look for, Jim? You know, when you read new writing, because was that you'd written a few plays, and you were.
I was desperate to get out of the working class box I'd been put into by some journalists. That was sort of a Sean O'Casey, Brendan Behan thing, and there was only so many plays you can write set in Dublin. So I needed an idea. I needed to get out of Dublin, and I'd been in London. I'd gone over to work on the sites to get some money together. Right. So I'd met these. To me, they were old men at the time. They were only looking in their late 30s and 40s. And I was listening to a radio interview one afternoon with Mike Murphy on RTE, and there's a book called I Could Read the Sky. I can't remember the man who wrote it, and he was talking about the navvies in London and all this, and I got the title in my head, and I ran upstairs straight away, and I wrote it in 2 weeks.
You wrote the play in 2 weeks?
Yeah, the first draft. I mean, there was work done at subsequent in rehearsals, but I just got a burst of energy, and I just thought this is my way out of Dublin. So I was writing something that was country based, whether it was going to be Kings or something else. I just had to get out of the pigeonhole.
And was it that energy that you could feel on those pages, Jim, when you read it first?
When Jimmy says quite rightly, and I remember when he arrived on the scene, that connection that was being made between Jimmy was a house painter and Behan was a house painter, and they were both playwrights, and suddenly you had the connection. And he was he was inheriting that mantle. And Jimmy was never, even before I knew him, I knew that was an unfair burden to be putting on anybody. But I'd also be lying if I didn't say that one of the immediate attractions of the play to me was that it was speaking to an audience that was important for me, which was an audience that typically didn't, in my youth, come to theatres like this or come to plays at all. And I lived in London for a couple of years just after I left school, and I saw those people on the streets. And when I recognised them, some of them were relatives of mine. When I recognised them in the play, it was an absolute imperative that with that Red Kettle should present the work, because it spoke to both our audience at home and it spoke to me very directly about a whole generation of people whose lives had been forgotten.
Yeah.
And I thought he captured that absolutely wonderfully, and it was a really potent reminder to me of the value and the power of theatre, that it can make that very visceral connection, between the stage and the world outside it. It was just a real thrill to have possession of the play. And we worked really hard. We cast actors in it. It wasn't as... We cast them for the look of them. We cast them for what we understood of how they would respond to people like those characters. It wasn't just, let's get actor A, B, and C. We had a sort of an innate sense of, if you dug deep, you'd find out how well they would respond to the depths that the play would bring you to. So that it was... The particular people we put together, what was that television series, The A-Team? A group of really odd people who came together for a particular purpose, but we knew once you got them into the room, it was going to be an incredibly powerful
One of the English
journey.
Newspapers actually mentioned that, and he said the cast looked like they just strolled in off the street in Kilburn.
Yeah, and that was deliberate, that was conscious. Like, these faces were chiselled, just like the faces of the men that we would have encountered in different ways in London without knowing each other. And that was just the look of them. But also, if you take an actor like Noel O'Donovan, whose breathing heart, just the sense in which he connected to not just his own character in the play, but to the lives that they led. And you knew you were getting, before they stepped into the rehearsal room, that extra 10 or 20%. They were up to the play.
Okay.
They were good enough to realise not just a really powerful play, but those lives.
Yeah.
Like, it's a huge responsibility that Jimmy took on, that every writer takes on, if you have any respect for what you're up to.
Yes.
But Jimmy embraced that responsibility, and then it put the responsibility back on me as a director and me on them as actors. And collectively, I've never been happier in a rehearsal room. Even to speak about it today is to evoke memories that remind me of why I do what I do. I can't tell you, and it's not because he's here, how important it was. Just as a reminder, and it was particularly important for me in the year I was leaving Red Kettle.
To have that experience.
Yeah. So it was powerful. Yeah.
And I mean, that's a question we've been talking a lot with our students at WRT about, this question of what is theatre, what is its purpose, that you so beautifully said there, Jim, about, putting the lives of people on the stage and trying to understand experience and the world around you. So after that production, Jimmy, where did you go then? So you were in Dublin, but you had left Dublin.
Yeah, and then I sort of moved
play.
on. Another play with Red Kettle, the Castlecomer Jukebox,
Yes.
which again, me moving away from where I was. Because I was very conscious of the arc of a writer's life. I'd been looking back on Miller's plays, O'Casey's, Frail's, to see even maybe Frail's days in Ballybeg, but the journey that the world of your world as a writer. So I was always trying to push that on and on and on. And then I made a conscious decision to write only female. I wrote two all-female plays.
Okay.
It was quite a difficult task because one stage the Abbey said, we want your archetypal play, which was men telling each other to F off all the time. And I said, I don't want to write those anymore. So
and can I ask you why you made that conscious decision?
Well, I was aware at a third play in the Abbey, the Music Belt, I was talking to, I think Deirdre Malloy was in it. Yes, she was in it. And I was very well aware that there was more work for male playwrights anyway, but for actors and, bar being an auntie or a cousin or sister, there was very little work for them. So I thought, I should write a play for that. So it was to sort of contribute to to the opportunity to work.
Yeah.
But it wasn't as easy as I thought. Like I said, they wanted my archetypal plays, and I've always gone against. And it's cost me in time more than anything else, because it takes years to build up a new relationship with a new theatre. But I could have gone on writing, my working class ghetto plays, and I didn't want to. I pushed and pushed and pushed, and I eventually got out of there. So it's liberating as a playwright, because you're no longer anchored to a theme or a place or a world, and that was very important to me. That there's great freedom there. Now I can write. I've written about the Mossad in Dublin. My canvas now is vast, and I think it's been worth those 10, 15 years of struggling to get away from the flats and the working class streets.
Yeah, and having to. I'm sure it's difficult as an artist when the National Theatre says we want this, and you don't want to go there.
Yeah.
So that's
and it's crushing, because you think, do you have the big row? Do you fight your corner? Or, and around that time there were other opportunities. There still was a Red Kettle. There still was a Focus Theatre, and the other companies in Dublin. And I think I'm probably jumping the gun a bit. But where we've come to now, all that is gone.
Yes.
And the full length play is not in danger, but it's on fragile ground, because it's expensive to produce for start. But I'm concerned for the craft of playwriting, because so many one-man, one-woman shows are propping up now, because they're easy to produce, and it's usually actors who hit their late 20s, 30s and panic and think I better write my show. And that we're seeing so much of that now, that the great 2-act, 3-act play is starting to vanish, and particularly where we are now in the world is probably under greater pressure now.
Yeah. And Jim, have you had any moments in your life where you've had to, where you've been faced with a challenge and have had to say, no, artistically I want to go this direction, but have had to, have you had any moments like that similar to
I've had
Jimmy?
no challenges. I've led a gifted life. Jimmy thinks a lot more about the trade than I do, and I don't say that with any kind of pride. Jimmy and I talk. We don't meet that often now for very obvious reasons, but we talk a fair bit on the phone. And Jimmy has been very involved politically in a very really wonderful sense with the whole shenanigans about the Abbey Theatre. And I would be a long way away from, other than nodding my head and kind of going, well, that's the way things are.
Right.
I kind of keep my head to myself a bit, which is not something I'm very proud of. But I just write what I want as a playwright. Now, as a theatre director, but as someone when I ran Red Kettle, that was very much a political thing. You were connected to a community, and it had responsibilities that I took up. But as a writer, my responsibility is to myself.
Okay.
Even though when I'm writing it, I'm very conscious and concerned and caring about who the audience are, and that I'm writing for a particular audience. But actually what the plays are about and who I am in relation to them, I wait for the next one. And I wait a long time for the next one. And then when I get something, I kind of zone in on that and I plough that field. In the kind of reasonably certain, sure knowledge that the audience that's always in the back of my head are by definition going to respond to me because of the kind of writer that I am. I play to a certain audience, and it's important to me that I do, and that's my community. But I don't exercise myself about it that much, and especially about the material. It's like, in the last 10 years I've been on, would say Valentine Greatrex, 17th century in Lismore. I've been in a hospital in Hammersmith. I've been in the whole blue shirt thing in the 30s in Waterford. I've been all over the place because that's the next thing that came into my head. So I don't worry about, I don't trouble myself. I have enough trouble.
And a question to both of you, was this when you're waiting, when you're in that moment, you've finished one play, you're waiting for the next, so for maybe writers who are listening to us today and emerging writers, how do you sustain yourself during that waiting period?
Financially or energetically or
metaphysically?
Emotionally? Well, I will have an idea. By the time I've finished one play, I will have an idea that I'll pursue, whether that becomes a play or not. Because there is that great sense of elation when you've finished what you consider your last draft, and then there's that immediate depression that you've got to do it all over again. And that can be really tough because you can burn yourself out in a year or two of rewriting and rewriting, and then you get it to this, production, and then you've got to start all over again. And that's great in your 20s and 30s. You get into your 40s and 50s, and the 2 or 3 years between plays, there's less road ahead. I'm quite lucky now. I'm just working on a monologue for the Abbey for the Bloody Sunday commemorations. I have another play that I've almost completed, and there's a play growing in my head, and I know it sounds odd, but it'll write itself in my head, and all I'll have to do is just sit down, and it'll come out, and then the rewriting of that will be sort of the scaffolding, the structure of the play. So whenever we come out of this, I should have 2 or 3 plays, but that's like two years' work, all backed up, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of writers will have 2 or 3 plays, and maybe all vying for whatever spots are available if theatre is there when we come out of this.
Yeah. And Jim, how about you?
I can certainly identify with that vacuum after a play opens, and if there isn't anything else in the fridge waiting to be taken out, where you just have to wait, and that can be a bit scary, and it can be also scary when you have the idea and you know how, sort of as you get older particularly, how high the mountain is. Just to write anything, never mind whether it's going to be any good or not, but just to begin it and end it is a fairly tough old journey. And it's not like coal mining or deep sea fishing or anything like that, but it has its own challenges. But once you're in the foothills, then you're working. And once you're working, it doesn't matter how long it takes, because each day is a small step towards the next place. It's a blessing if when you're writing one, there's another one waiting. And I would have had in the last 10 years, knowing what the next one was before the previous one. And then there came a period at the end of a play called Johnny I Hardly Knew You, 2016 or thereabouts, 2016, where the well was dry. And that was really good, because I'd had 10 or 12 years where we were on the treadmill. Yeah. And then I realised I wanted to go back home as a writer. I wanted to go back to Waterford. And I wouldn't have discovered that if there'd been that treadmill of the next play. I was actually sitting there doing nothing for months and knowing that I wanted to go home. And that discovery was made out of the vacuum. So I remember Tom Kilroy years and years and given a certain talent, the real virtue is patience. And sometimes he'd say it's the only one. But without patience. And I remember Megan, my daughter, she's in the writing game herself now, and the only contribution that I was able to make to what she's up to when she told me she was writing a novel was to talk to her in terms of patience and small steps, that it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so that sense that Jimmy talks about setting off on the journey it's a really exciting part, and it's a bit arduous, but the real thing when you say about what can you say to young writers is about patience, and especially right now.
Yes.
We all have the younger and very tough road ahead of us. So it is going to be challenging, isn't that the word? Yeah,
because you have the sense, or sometimes you can get the sense from the way people are talking in social media, that people have just been busy, during the last few months. But then you also hear those voices of, that isolation, not being part of your theatre community or not being able to network has really stunted people's rhythms and work processes. And so as much as this is for young writers, what would you say to, you've talked there about the arc of the playwright, Jimmy. What do you say to your own contemporaries?
I was just talking to Billy Rhodes the other day. I think everybody is battle hardened after a certain age, that they're used to the digs and the pitfalls. So they there's nothing really I could say to them apart from even what Jim said. It's just patience. After you've spent 20, 30 years as a playwright working in theatre, you've had so many ups and downs that this isn't difficult for me, what's happening. Okay. This is normal for me. I work in isolation. I'll work from 8 in the morning, sometimes till 6 without a break. So I don't see the outside world anyway. So this is pretty normal for me. But I do get that sense that I would break up the working routine with maybe a coffee with someone in town, or a drink, or just catching up with them, and that's gone. So there is no sense of the world. Everybody is sort of frozen. Nobody seems to know. We're all looking to each other as to a way out of here. We're not having the conversations in the press that the Brits are having. The Guardian is quite up on where they're at in terms of the West End and theatre companies and what are possible ways of coming out of this. We're not having any of that, and I don't know why that is.
And do you mean there in terms of having the conversations about what the landscape of theatre, is this a moment of change in Irish theatre that we could...
will it change audiences? Will a 1,000-seater be a viable thing in future? Will there be a fall off a percentage gone? I'm not going back to theatre anymore. Will I have shifted fundamentally that the kind of plays I write will be seen differently, and they'll want the 90-minute play, the 60-minute play? It's something that I might have to adapt to, but I just don't know. It probably will continue on, because we're great at things like that, but there's this in the back of your head, you're wondering, who'll survive? Will the Gates survive? Will Druid survive? Or what versions of them will come through this? Because, there's very little at the moment. I'm working with Decadent in 2022 on the Gaiety with a new play. So they're looking to the future. That's the only company I know. The Living Dreads and all that are stuck in, their funding for this year, the shows. So it's terrifying. I hope they come out, and I hope the landscape will be there. It's just the little stops, the companies, the people, the artistic directors. If they're not there, we're in serious trouble. And I think that's the thing that we're missing. That kind of conversation is, what's Plan B if this doesn't work out?
I would say that there's an immediate terror, for people who work in the performing arts, which is absolutely identical to the terror that exists in the world beyond our shores. So we have that in common. This is for everybody. We're not alone.
No.
I think that anyway, like, we're of a generation where the nature of the game changes, and the performing arts are no different to anybody in that, or to any other art in that respect. And I've certainly been aware over the last 20 years of somebody, a theatre worker, who's getting old, and whose work is getting old in relation to what's coming. There's a whole new generation. And I remember when I was the younger generation, and even in this town, a great friend of mine, the late James Chasty, was a playwright whom I adored as a human being, as a playwright, and as a friend. And I wouldn't put on his work in 100 years. Why? Because it was old-fashioned, or so I thought. Teresa Deevy, I was interested in one of her plays, Katie Roach. Wouldn't hardly look at the rest of them. Because I was the young Turk coming up. And suddenly those people have got a lot more attractive to me as writers as I get older. Yeah. But it is quite it's proper that we move over, and that the new forms and new practitioners come in and take our places. Yeah. That would have happened anyway, I think. Yeah. I think we're challenged. The challenge is slightly different now, and it obviously that challenge is there for that younger generation as well. But I think they'll respond better than us with the whole digital thing. I personally think it would be a huge loss if we get to a point where people, as Jimmy says, are so scared they won't come out, and it will become a digital medium. Because I think what's cravenly missed at the moment, not just in theatre, but across the world, is that whole sense of the communal, of people sharing, whether it's in the pub, at the football match, or at the play. And I think that's what we're missing, and I think everybody wants that back, and I think it will come back, and I think it will come back to the theatre. But I get the feeling that for the next couple of years, the prospect for citizens to come in to the dark, into a place that may or may not be air-conditioned, there's going to be a proper nervousness about that, and we're just going to have to ride it out. But I think the form would have changed anyway. And I think generationally, everybody moves on when it's their time. Yeah. We just cling on for as long as we can, James.
And from where you're sitting now, metaphorically, as you look back, I suppose, what have been the most significant changes, do you think, that you've seen happening in Irish drama
theatre? Well, the most profound was the culling of all the companies from 2008 and 9, when they were just gone, and then there was rumours that the Arts Council were saying the play is dead. It's all about deconstruction and reconstruction, that somehow playwrights were on some pedestal, and that was a position that was, that they wanted to dismantle. And there was I couldn't understand what they mean, but it was always difficult to have a play on. So when the companies went, that world, you were hanging on by your fingernails. We were, there was no, I can't remember the list of companies now, but they all faded away, and all of a sudden there was nowhere to send your play. Red Kettle had vanished. People like Live and Dread came up, Decadent came up, but there were so many of us there with, Marina, Billy, Bernard, Connor was doing all right in England, but we were all vying for a smaller slice of a smaller cake. And then that wasn't compounded when, things changed in the Abbey and they stopped doing the work again. So I suppose it all began around the time of the crash, and the theatre companies stopped being funded, and you applied for, I think, a year of financing rather than 2 or 3 years got you through. And I think, just touching back on something I said, that will have affected the craft of playwriting, even though I agree with Jim, each generation should change and push them out, but you still have to fill. You can be as adventurous and as risk taking as you want. You still have to fill seats, or you won't make a living. And I think that's what I'd say to younger writers is you need a hit. It's crude, but you do need something that when the phone stops ringing. And you're sort of forgotten about that your plays, that people will go and see your play. I've been very lucky with King's, that it's played somewhere non-stop since the amateur rights came out 18 years ago. You don't get masses of money, but your play is on all the time. And I think the kids who are doing the woman show, are they going to be doing that when they're 35, 45, 50? No, they're not. So they need to think, how am I going to survive in this business? We've seen short plays running for a week, 2 week. They're
it's tough.
To a 30 people in the audience, and that's grand. You can do that when you're just out of college. But if you want a life in theatre, you need to fill a 400, 500, 600 theatre 6 nights a week for 4 or 5 weeks, because that's what's at stake for the theatres, for them to stay open.
So you're responding to what they need as well as thinking about your own legacy.
Yeah.
Just when Jimmy mentioned, and it's a great thing that the Kings of the Kilburn High Road, one of his plays, is sustained by the amateur drama movement. That we've learned recently that the next year's amateur drama festival in Athlone has been cancelled. This year already went the way of all flesh, and I think that's a shame. That will be particularly felt in rural Ireland. There's hardly a town worth calling itself a town that doesn't have, or a village worth calling itself a village that doesn't have its amateur drama group, which in rural Ireland are, I can't say they're as important as the local hurling team, but they are very important. And so it's sort of, I'd like to be able, as somebody who, like Jimmy, who's benefited from revivals over the last 20 and 30 years of plays that, the professional world had long forgotten about. Plays like Moonshine and The Salvage Shop, which are, go on again and again, and they pay the bills. And so we're very grateful for the contribution that they make to keeping theatre alive. And what I particularly loved was in recent years how the amateur theatre movement has moved with the generations. That they were doing ours, but they're also doing Martin McDonagh and our own buddy, the Conor McPherson. You know what I mean? So they're been
branching out as well.
Absolutely, they play a huge important role. I mean, more people will see your work on the amateur circuit than a 6-week run of the Abbey. And they're sort of looked down their noses upon by some people, but I think they're the backbone of theatre, because you think about it, you get your play on here and it'll run for a couple of weeks, but small little town halls and community centres, festivals run for a week, and they have an extraordinary collection of plays that are on for the festival, and some of them hold 200-300 people, and for me it's about people seeing your play. And it's I know the amateur movement will come back from this, but they do play a huge part in keeping your work alive. I've had three of my plays feature, 4 feature over the years, And I'm blessed for that, because people get to see plays that you don't normally get to see anymore. I mean, we've all had plays that once they finish their opening run, never see the light of day again. And it shouldn't be like that. And thanks to the amateur circuit, it's not.
It's interesting, some of the work we're doing at WT with my colleague Una Keeley we're analysing some letters that Teresa Deevy wrote to James Chasty, and in one of her pieces of advice to him is he's finding it really hard in the 50s and 60s to get his work produced. It's almost like it's the same conversation, but her advice is to seek out, and this is a quote from one of the letters, the little theatres and the amateur, that is, she's talking about, that's where you plug into those networks and those collaborations, and it's exactly like what you're saying.
And James took that advice.
Yes.
Like some of the hits that he had in Dublin started their lives in the small theatres in the suburbs, in Dunleary, the Gas Company Theatre in Dunleary, a small little theatre, I can't remember the name, and not the Focus, but on the same street. And he had what were momentous sort of occasions in his life. The first nights of his plays were given in 40 and 50-seater theatres in Dublin. So I know how much that meant to him, that connection to those smaller theatres.
And that's what we're missing too, those, like the Pikes and the Focuses, those have vanished. And this, people are trying, Carla tried it with Theatre Upstairs, it was still too small. You need a 60, 70, 80-seater audience, but we're missing that too. And again, this comes from the new generation, the next generation, who need to find those little back streets and back alleyways and the muses of the old garages and turn them.
Isn't it increasingly the case that they're finding them in spaces that people like me don't even know exist? I think it's very important as we finish, and we're in it. This is being filmed in a wonderful conventional theatre. Is that there's generations coming up who not refuse this, but hardly know these spaces because they have their own and they work. They work in an
absolutely.
I sometimes feel that feel as old as the people that I used to be listening to when I was starting out. And they were kind of going, yes, it's all very well, but, is it theatre? Yes, it is theatre. And what the generation below us are coming up doing is also. And that's not to invalidate our own work. I'm happy in my own skin to work in the form that I do. That was me. And
that's your craft.
That's what I do.
Yes.
And it is a craft. And I'm very proud of it, and I'm not gainsaying it. But I would be both stupid and arrogant if I thought it was the only way in.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And also if I was stupid enough to think I could somehow readapt or adjust to what is essentially a whole digital age, and a way of presenting theatre that is inevitably going to be very different to what we were doing. Good luck to that and to them. And I think there'll still be room for.
Yeah, I think so too.
Old fogies like ourselves.
Do you think you don't see that in London? I will go to see what's happening in theatre in London, and it's still very much like Jez Butterworth would be king over there. So that kind of play, that's the world I'm in. I don't see them over there doing that. I see it in Dublin because maybe we're much smaller. And I don't go as much maybe to those kind of shows that I should. But it just seems to be... Is there a young Arthur Miller, or is he irrelevant to maybe the students you teach, or those kind of plays? Are they not? I mean, is this an old-fashioned place to them? Are they, that's what I find interesting. Is are we, the walking wounded now, and we're on our way out?
It's interesting, even because we were having the very conversation actually just on the other day about one of the students asking, what is theatre? Is it wanting to know what are the essential characteristics, what do I need, but they were talking very much about a play. That is the sense that I got, so I think even within the younger generation there are always going to be those interested in kind of having that continuum where there's the genres that maybe are dipping into live art and performance, and then the Arthur Miller types or the work that GV was trying to do. So
there's room for it all.
There's room for it all, and that's, in terms of whatever landscape we go back into, I really hope it can be one of diversity for all and becoming more inclusive of the amateur drama circle, different writers from different backgrounds. I think this can be a hopeful time too, that we can change things for the better.
Here's hoping.
So we leave it there. Thank you both very much. Jim Nolan and Jimmy Murphy, it's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for your authentic responses and storytelling.
Thanks.